The lights in Nexus Station's cantina flickered with the usual power problems that plagued frontier outposts. Jake Murphy wiped down another glass behind the bar, his movement steady and practiced after 3 years of serving drinks to every kind of alien that passed through this corner of space. The cantina was packed tonight with the usual crowd of traders, smugglers, and mercenaries looking to spend their credits on cheap alcohol and cheaper company. Jake had seen it all during his time here. Drunk Zalathi, trying to impress females with tales of their trading prowess. Hegemony deserters spending their last credits before disappearing into the outer rim. Pirates bragging about raids that probably never happened. Tonight was no different except for the large reptilian alien holding court at the far end of the bar. Krextal was his name, and he was a Vorthak mercenary whose scarred hide and battle-worn armor told stories of violence across the galaxy. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, his yellow eyes gleaming as he regaled anyone within earshot about his latest contracts. His translator crackled with each word, turning his hissing native language into heavily accented standard. "You see these scars?" Krextal announced, pointing to deep gouges across his chest armor. "Got these fighting the Syndicate fleet at Vega 7. 3 ships they sent against my unit. 3 ships we destroyed." The crowd around him murmured appreciation, buying him another round of the potent Rigelian whiskey he favored. Jake continued his work, half listening to the familiar rhythm of spacer boasts and exaggerations. He had heard variations of the same stories countless times. Every mercenary claimed to have fought impossible odds. Every trader insisted they had outwitted the most dangerous pirates. Every smuggler swore they had made runs that no one else could complete. But something about Krextal's next story made Jake's hand pause in its cleaning motion. The Vorthak mercenary had moved on from his previous exploits and was now describing what he called his easiest contract ever. "Simple extermination job," Krextal laughed, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Some backwater world called Earth. Humans had found something they shouldn't have. My unit was hired to make sure they forgot about it permanently." The other aliens in the crowd leaned in closer. Earth had a reputation among the galactic community as a death world, a planet so dangerous that most species avoided it entirely. The few who had visited came back with stories of impossible weather, deadly predators, and humans who seemed to bond with anything that moved. "Death world," scoffed a Rigelian trader. "Must have been dangerous work." Krextal's laugh was like grinding metal. "Dangerous? These humans are soft pink creatures that break easily. We hit their little research station in the mountains and they scattered like prey animals. 12 of them total, hiding in their primitive facility like insects in a nest." Jake's grip tightened almost imperceptibly on the glass he was cleaning, but his expression remained neutral. He had perfected the art of looking interested without actually caring, a necessary skill for any bartender who wanted to avoid getting involved in his customers' problems. "The mission briefing said humans were pack hunters," Krextal continued. "Said they were dangerous when cornered. What a joke. They begged for mercy when we cornered them, cried and pleaded like children. The female leader even offered to destroy their research if we would spare her team." The crowd was hanging on every word now. Stories about human encounters were rare, and most spacers had never seen one of the mysterious inhabitants of the death world. Jake was probably the only human most of them had ever met, and he kept his past carefully hidden behind the mundane persona of a frontier. "Bartender, so what did you do?" asked a young hegemony pilot who looked like he had never seen real combat. Krextal's yellow eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. "We killed them all anyway, of course. Contract was for elimination, not negotiation. The female leader died last after watching her entire team get executed one by one. Very satisfying work and the pay was excellent." Jake set down the glass and picked up another one, his movements still steady and controlled. He had learned long ago to keep his emotions buried deep, where they couldn't interfere with survival. The cantina was full of predators who would smell weakness and exploit it without hesitation. "Must have been well defended," commented another mercenary. "Earth facilities usually have military protection." "That's the beautiful part," Krextal replied. "It was just researchers. Scientists studying old alien ruins or some such nonsense. No military, no weapons, no defenses. Like shooting fish in a barrel, as humans say." The conversation continued around him, but Jake found his attention drifting to memories he usually kept locked away. Earth seemed impossibly distant from this grimy frontier station, But sometimes the homesickness hit him like a physical blow. He thought about blue skies and real weather, about forests that weren't grown in hydroponic tanks and oceans that stretched beyond the horizon. "Bartender," Krextall called out, gesturing with his empty glass, "another whiskey? And tell these fools what your death world is really like. They think I'm exaggerating about how weak humans are." Jake walked over and refilled the mercenary's glass, meeting his eyes briefly. "Earth's dangerous enough," he said quietly. "Depends on what you're looking for." "See?" Krextall announced to the crowd. "Even he admits his own species is weak. Probably ran away from Earth like most of them do. Can't handle their own planet's dangers, so they scatter across the galaxy looking for easier places to live." Jake returned to his position behind the bar without comment. He had learned that arguing with drunk customers was bad for business and worse for his health. Better to let them talk themselves out and move on to other topics. But as the night wore on and Krextall continued his stories, Jake found himself listening more carefully to the details. The mercenary was describing the research station's location, the layout of the buildings, even specific details about the researchers he had killed. Most spacer stories were vague and full of obvious lies, but Krextall's account had the ring of truth to it. The cantina began to empty as the station's night cycle progressed, but the Vorthak mercenary showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, the alcohol was making him more talkative, more willing to share details that a sober mercenary might have kept to himself. Jake continued serving drinks and cleaning glasses, but part of his mind was elsewhere, sifting through the mercenary's words and trying to understand why this particular story bothered him so much. The cantina had quieted considerably as the night cycle deepened, but Krextall was just getting started. The Vorthak mercenary had switched from Rigelian whiskey to something stronger, and his tongue was loosening with each drink. Jake continued his work behind the bar, but he found himself paying closer attention to the alien's increasingly detailed account of the Earth mission. The research station was called Rocky Mountain Station, Krextall said, his words slightly slurred but still clear enough through the translator. Hidden away in some primitive mountain range where the humans thought no one would find them. Foolish creatures, thinking they could hide from proper surveillance technology. A Zelathi trader who had been nursing the same drink all night leaned forward with interest. What were they researching that was so important someone paid for a full extermination contract? Krextall's laugh was harsh and grating. "Ancient alien ruins, if you can believe it." Apparently these humans had found evidence of some old civilization that died out millions of years ago. The kind of discovery that makes primitive species think they're important in the grand scheme of things. Jake's hand stilled on the glass he was cleaning. Archaeological discoveries were rare and valuable, the kind of thing that could shift political balances and trade agreements across multiple sectors. More importantly, they were exactly the type of work his sister had been involved in during her last communication with him. Must have been valuable. "Information to justify hiring a full mercenary unit," observed the hegemony pilot, who was still hanging on every word of the story. "Valuable enough," Krextall agreed, though I never cared much about the politics behind it. Credits are credits, and the job was simple enough. 12 soft humans in an isolated facility with no backup and no defenses. My unit could have handled twice that number without breaking a sweat. The mercenary paused to drain his glass and gesture for another refill. Jake moved to pour the drink, his expression carefully neutral despite the growing unease in his chest. There was something familiar about the details Krextall was sharing, something that made old memories stir uncomfortably. The facility was well equipped for research, the alien continued. Lots of fancy human technology and analysis equipment. The researchers had been there for months, digging through ruins and cataloging artifacts. Very thorough work, I'll give them credit for that much. "Did they put up any fight?" asked another mercenary, a scarred Rigelian with the look of someone who had seen too many battles. Krextall's yellow eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "Fight? These were scientists, not soldiers. When we breached their perimeter, half of them tried to run while the other half tried to hide. Very disappointing, really. I was hoping for more sport." Jake set the refilled glass in front of the Vorthak and returned to his cleaning, but his mind was racing. The details were too specific, too accurate for this to be another spacer tall tale. Research stations were common enough, but isolated archaeological facilities studying ancient civilizations were much rarer. The team leader was particularly pathetic, Krextall went on, his voice taking on a mocking tone. Human female, middle-aged, kept insisting that their research was peaceful and non-threatening, as if that mattered once the contract was signed. The alien took another long drink before continuing. She offered to destroy all their data, wipe their computers clean and pretend they had never found anything. Begged us to let her team go free in exchange for complete silence about their discovery. Smart thinking, commented the Zalathi trader. Might have worked with some contractors. Might have, Krextal agreed. But our employers were very specific about the terms. No witnesses, no survivors, no loose ends. The female leader watched us execute her entire team one by one, hoping until the very end that cooperation might save at least some of them. Jake's movements behind the bar became more mechanical as he focused on controlling his breathing. The story was hitting too close to memories he tried to keep buried. Details that matched information from communications he had received months ago. What was her name? He asked quietly, not looking up from the glass in his hands. Krextal paused in his narrative and looked at the human bartender with mild curiosity. Her name? Why would you care about that? Just wondering, Jake replied, his voice steady and casual. Human names are always interesting to hear out here. The mercenary shrugged his massive shoulders. Something Hayes, I think. Lisa Hayes, maybe? Hard to remember exact details when you've killed as many as I have. They all blur together after a while. The glass in Jake's hands cracked along one edge, but his expression remained unchanged. He set it aside and picked up another one, continuing his cleaning routine while his mind processed what he had just heard. She wore this interesting pendant, Krextal continued, reaching into a pouch on his armor. Some sort of primitive human religious symbol. I kept it as a trophy from the mission. The mercenary pulled out a small silver cross on a delicate chain and held it up to catch the cantina's dim lighting. It was clearly human-made, with intricate engravings along the edges that spoke of careful craftsmanship and personal significance. Pretty work for such a primitive species, observed the Zalathi trader. Human metalwork can be quite detailed when they put effort into it. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach as he recognized the pendant. He had seen it before, in family photos and video calls that seemed like they belonged to another lifetime. The cross had been a gift from their grandmother, passed down through generations of a family that valued faith and tradition above material wealth. The female leader never stopped praying to whatever human gods she believed in, Krextal said with disgust, right up until the end, muttering words in their primitive languages and clutching that little symbol like it might actually help her. The other patrons laughed along with the mercenary's mockery, but Jake remained silent behind the bar. His mind was working through implications and possibilities, trying to process information that changed everything about his quiet life on the frontier station. Must have been quite a discovery to justify such extreme measures, he said carefully. Ancient civilizations don't usually threaten anyone in the present day. Krextal's expression grew more serious, though the alcohol kept him talking when sobriety might have counseled silence. This one was different, apparently. The artifacts they found suggested connections to current political arrangements, things that certain parties wanted to keep buried permanently. The mercenary finished his drink and gestured for another refill. Jake moved to pour it, but his hands were no longer quite as steady as they had been earlier in the evening. The cantina had grown quieter as more patrons filtered out into the station's corridors, but those who remained seemed drawn to Krextal's increasingly detailed account of his Earth mission. The Vorthak mercenary was well into his cups now, the strong alcohol loosening both his tongue and his judgment about what details should remain classified. The fascinating thing about this particular job, Krextal continued, swaying slightly on his stool, was how thoroughly we had to destroy everything. Usually you eliminate the targets and leave, but this contract required complete obliteration of all research materials, equipment, and even the facility itself. Jake refilled the alien's glass with mechanical precision, but his attention was completely focused on every word. The pendant still lay on the bar where Krextal had placed it, the small silver cross catching reflections from the cantina's bioluminescent fixtures. Every time Jake's eyes fell on it, another piece of his carefully constructed new life seemed to crack and fall away. Orbital bombardment, the mercenary explained with obvious satisfaction. After we finished with the research team, we called in fire support to glass the entire site. Nothing left but fused rock and vapor. Very thorough work, very professional. A young hegemony pilot who had been listening with wide-eyed fascination finally worked up the courage to ask a question. "Weren't you worried about human military response? Earth forces have a reputation for being protective of their people." Krextal's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Human military? By the time their slow bureaucracy figured out something was wrong, we were 3 systems away spending our credits. Besides, it was just a research station, not like we hit a military target or anything important." The casual dismissal of his sister's life and work hit Jake like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral through long years of practice. He had learned to hide his emotions during his military service, and that training served him well now as he processed the full implications of what he was hearing. "The humans did try to send out a distress signal," Krextal admitted. "One of the researchers managed to get to their communications array before we stopped them. Probably didn't matter, though. Who would have cared enough to investigate?" Jake's grip tightened on the towel he was using to clean glasses. He remembered the encrypted message that had reached him 3 months ago, routing through military channels to find him at his medical discharge location. The message had been brief and official, informing him that his sister's research facility had suffered a catastrophic equipment failure with no survivors. "Must have been dangerous work for your unit," observed the scarred Rigelian mercenary. "Earth humans are supposed to be tough when cornered." "Dangerous?" Krextal's yellow eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "I told you these were soft scientists. The only danger was dying of boredom. Though I will admit the facility's location made things slightly more complicated." The alien paused to drain his glass again, clearly enjoying having an audience for his war stories. Rocky Mountain Research Station was built into the side of a cliff face, about 3,000 meters above sea level. Humans apparently thought the isolation and difficult terrain would provide natural protection. Jake felt his blood turn cold as more details fell into place. Lisa had mentioned the altitude in her last personal message, complaining about headaches and difficulty sleeping as she adjusted to the thin air. She had been excited about the discovery, talking about artifacts that could rewrite their understanding of ancient galactic civilizations. "The approach was the trickiest part," Krextal continued. "Had to use atmospheric drop pods to get past their detection systems. Humans rely too much on technology and not enough on proper reconnaissance. By the time they knew we were there, it was far too late for any meaningful resistance." "How many in your unit?" asked the Zalathi trader, who seemed to be taking mental notes for his own possible future reference. 8 specialists, the mercenary replied proudly. Vorthak assault team with full combat gear and orbital support. Massive overkill for 12 unarmed researchers, but the client was paying premium rates for guaranteed success. Jake moved along the bar, collecting empty glasses and wiping down surfaces with automatic movements while his mind raced through calculations and possibilities. 8 professional soldiers against 12 civilian scientists. No contest, no hope, no chance for survival once the attack began. The team leader put up the most resistance, Krextal said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. She actually tried to negotiate, offering to trade their research data for safe passage off-world for her people. Very touching display of leadership. Completely futile, of course. The pendant caught the light again as Krextal picked it up and examined it more closely. She kept clutching this little symbol and talking to someone called Mike, telling them she was sorry and that she loved them. Humans are such emotional creatures, wasting their last moments on sentiment instead of fighting. Jake's hand stilled on the surface he was cleaning. Mike had been Lisa's pet name for him since childhood, a shortened version of his middle name that only family members ever used. She would have been thinking about their last conversation, probably regretting the argument they'd had about her taking such a dangerous assignment so far from home. "Did you record any of it?" asked the hegemony pilot, clearly fascinated by the details of the massacre. "Standard mission documentation," Krextal confirmed, "though I doubt anyone will ever review it. The client paid extra for discretion, which usually means the recordings get deleted once payment clears." The mercenary tucked the pendant back into his armor pouch and gestured for another drink. The whole operation took less than 6 hours from insertion to extraction. Professional work, clean execution, no complications or survivors. Exactly the kind of job that builds a reputation in this business. Jake poured the requested refill, but his mind was elsewhere, processing the tactical details and timeline Krextal had provided. 6 hours to hunt down and execute 12 people, who had trusted their government to protect them, who had believed their research was important enough to risk their lives for. Must have paid well for such thorough work, commented another patron. Very well indeed, Krextal agreed. Enough credits to keep my unit equipped and operational for several months. The client clearly valued absolute discretion and guaranteed results. The conversation continued around him, but Jake found himself thinking about Lisa's final message to him. She had seemed worried about something, mentioning increased government oversight and questions about the political implications of their discoveries. She had asked him to visit when his medical leave was approved, saying she had something important to show him. He would never see her again, never hear her voice or her laugh or her excited descriptions of ancient mysteries waiting to be solved. Instead, he was serving drinks to the alien who had murdered her and listening to him brag about it like it was just another day at the office. The pendant was still visible in Krextal's armor pouch, a small reminder of the life that had been stolen and the justice that had never come. The crowd in the cantina had thinned to just a handful of die-hard drinkers who seemed determined to drink until the station's artificial dawn cycle began. Krextal was among the most determined, his massive frame still upright despite consuming enough alcohol to fell most species. The Vorthak's yellow eyes were beginning to show the effects of the liquor, but his tongue continued to wag with increasingly dangerous details about his Earth mission. The beautiful thing about working for high-level clients, he slurred slightly, is that they handle all the political complications afterward. One day there's a human research facility. The next day the official records show it never existed at all. Jake continued his methodical cleaning routine, but every muscle in his body felt coiled like a spring. He had spent 3 years building a quiet life on this frontier station. 3 years trying to forget the violence and chaos of his military service. Now all of that carefully constructed, peace was crumbling as he listened to his sisters. Killer brag about murder. Government. Cover-ups are always the most profitable jobs, observed the scarred Rigelian mercenary. No awkward questions afterward, no investigations. No complications with law enforcement. Krextal nodded sagely, as if he were sharing profound wisdom about their shared profession. Exactly right. The humans never even knew what really happened. Their government told them it was some kind of equipment malfunction, gas leak explosion or something equally mundane. Case closed. No further investigation required. The casual dismissal of 12 lives as a minor administrative detail made Jake's vision narrow slightly, but he maintained his carefully neutral expression. He had learned long ago that showing emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford when surrounded by predators. I kept one other trophy besides the pendant, Krextal announced, reaching into another pouch on his armor. The team leader's identification badge. Humans are so sentimental about their little plastic cards and metal symbols. He pulled out a laminated security badge and placed it next to the pendant on the bar. Even in the dim lighting, Jake could clearly see his sister's photograph and the Rocky Mountain Research Station logo. Dr. Lisa Hayes, senior xenoarchaeologist, level 7 security clearance. She looked younger in the picture, taken when she had first been assigned to the facility 2 years ago. She kept insisting that her research was important for galactic peace and understanding. Krextal continued with obvious mockery, said the artifacts they had found could prove that multiple species had common ancestors millions of years ago. Very touching dedication to scientific advancement, completely irrelevant to reality, of course. Jake picked up the badge and examined it more closely, noting the slight wear patterns and the small scratch across one corner where Lisa had dropped it on the laboratory floor. He could remember her complaining about the unflattering photograph during one of their video calls, how security never let anyone retake their identification pictures. "May I keep this?" he asked quietly, his voice carefully controlled. Krextal looked surprised by the request. "The badge? Why would you want human identification papers?" "Curiosity about Earth documentation," Jake replied smoothly. "I collect items from different worlds. Human artifacts are relatively rare out here in the frontier sectors." The mercenary shrugged his massive shoulders. "Keep it if you want. Not like I need proof of the job. My reputation speaks for itself and the client already confirmed payment." Jake pocketed the badge alongside the pendant, feeling the weight of both items like physical reminders of his failure to protect his family. He should have been there, should have found a way to get assigned to her security detail, should have convinced her to take a safer posting closer to Earth's defensive perimeters. The most amusing part, Krextal continued, his voice growing more slurred as the alcohol took hold, was how the humans kept calling for someone named Mike to help them. Even when they were dying, they believed someone was coming to save them. The towel in Jake's hands began to fray as his grip tightened involuntarily. Lisa had been calling for him in her final moments, expecting her big brother to appear and make everything safe like he had when they were children. Instead, she had died alone and afraid while he was halfway across the galaxy, recuperating from injuries sustained fighting someone else's war. Humans have very strong family bonds, observed the Zalathi trader. It makes them predictable in some ways, but also more dangerous when properly motivated. Dangerous, Krextal laughed harshly. These particular humans couldn't even organize proper resistance when faced with professional soldiers. They scattered like prey animals instead of fighting back like warriors. Jake set down the frayed towel and picked up another glass to clean. What kind of military training do you have? He asked conversationally. The question seemed to sober Krextal slightly, as if he suddenly remembered he was discussing classified operations with civilians. Standard Vorthak assault certification, he replied carefully, plus advanced combat training from several conflicts in the Outer Rim territories. Ever fought humans before this mission? Once or twice in minor skirmishes, the mercenary admitted, but those were military targets with proper weapons and training, very different from soft civilian researchers with no combat experience. Jake nodded thoughtfully, his expression still neutral and mildly interested. I've heard human military forces are supposed to be particularly dangerous. Something about their pack-hunting instincts and refusal to abandon wounded comrades. Propaganda, mostly, Krextal dismissed, though I'll admit their shock infantry units have earned some respect in certain circles. Never fought them directly myself, but other mercenary companies speak of them with unusual caution. The Rigelian mercenary leaned forward with interest. Shock infantry? I've heard stories about human special forces, but I thought most of it was exaggerated reputation building. Not entirely exaggerated, Krextal conceded reluctantly. Human military doctrine emphasizes aggression and persistence over tactical sophistication. They tend to keep fighting long after more intelligent species would surrender or withdraw. Jake moved to refill several glasses, his movements still smooth and controlled despite the growing tension in his shoulders. Sounds like they'd be dangerous enemies to make. Only if you're stupid enough to let them get close, the Vorthak replied. Superior technology and proper tactics neutralize most of their advantages. The key is maintaining distance and using overwhelming firepower before they can organize resistance. The conversation continued around him, but Jake's attention had shifted to tactical considerations and logistical planning. He was mentally cataloging the defensive capabilities of the cantina, the location of potential weapons, and the number of exits available if the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation. 3 years of bartending had not diminished. His military training or his ability to assess threats and develop response strategies. If anything, the isolation and enforced peace had given him time to refine his skills and consider applications he had never needed during active service. Krextal was still talking about his various exploits, but now Jake was listening with different ears, analyzing the aliens' capabilities and looking for weaknesses that could be exploited if necessary. The mercenary was large and well-armed, but he was also drunk and careless with information that should have remained classified. More importantly, he was completely unaware that he was bragging about murder to the brother of one of his victims. The cantina had reached that peculiar stage of late-night drinking, where conversations became either deeply philosophical or dangerously honest. Krextal had chosen the latter path, his alcohol-loosened tongue providing details about his Earth mission that would have horrified a sober mercenary. The few remaining patrons hung on his every word, fascinated by the rare first-hand account of operations on humanity's legendary death world. Jake had stopped pretending to clean glasses and now stood motionless behind the bar, his full attention focused on the Vorthak's increasingly specific descriptions of the massacre. The pendant and identification badge felt heavy in his pocket, physical reminders of the sister he would never see again, and the justice that had never come for her killers. The final phase was actually the most satisfying part, Krextal continued, his yellow eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. After we eliminated the research team, we had several hours to explore their facility and understand what they had discovered. He paused to drain another glass, seemingly unaware that his audience had grown deadly quiet. Even the other mercenaries seemed uncomfortable with the level of detail he was providing about what was clearly a classified operation. The artifacts they had found were genuinely impressive, the alien admitted. Stone tablets covered in mathematical formulae that proved advanced civilization had existed in this galaxy millions of years before current species achieved spaceflight. The kind of discovery that could rewrite historical records and political boundaries. Jake's hands remained steady, but his breathing had become controlled and deliberate in the way he had been trained during his military service. He was running through tactical scenarios in his mind, assessing threats and opportunities while maintaining the facade of a mildly interested bartender. "Why was that discovery so threatening?" asked the Zalathi trader. "Ancient history doesn't usually affect current politics." Krextal's expression grew more serious despite the alcohol clouding his judgment. These particular tablets suggested that several current galactic powers had built their territorial claims on falsified archaeological evidence. If the human research had become public knowledge, it could have destabilized trade agreements and political alliances across multiple sectors. The mercenary gestured grandly, nearly losing his balance on the stool. "So my employers decided it was cheaper to eliminate 12 researchers than risk major political upheaval. Simple cost-benefit analysis, very logical approach to problem solving." "What happened to the artifacts?" Jake asked quietly, his first direct question in over an hour. "Destroyed along with everything else," Krextal replied with obvious satisfaction. "Orbital bombardment doesn't leave much behind except fused glass and vapor." "Very thorough, very final." Jake nodded slowly, processing the full implications of what he had heard. His sister and her team had died not just for their discovery, but for the threat that discovery posed to corrupt political arrangements. They had been murdered to protect lies and maintain injustice on a galactic scale. "Must have been good money for such thorough work," observed the scarred Rigelian mercenary. "Excellent money," Krextal confirmed, "though I have to admit, the job was almost too easy. No challenge, no resistance, no sport at all. Sometimes I prefer targets that can fight back properly." He pulled out a small communicator device and activated a holographic display showing what appeared to be mission recordings. "I kept some footage from the operation. Want to see how real professionals handle soft targets?" The hologram flickered to life, showing shaky camera footage of armored figures moving through what was clearly a research facility. Jake could see his sister's laboratory equipment, the same computers and analysis tools she had described in her messages home. The perspective was from a helmet camera, providing a soldier's eye view of the massacre. "There's the team leader." Krextal pointed at a figure visible in the recording. "Dr. Lisa Hayes trying to hide behind her desk when we breached the laboratory. Very undignified behavior for someone with advanced degrees." Jake watched his sister's final moments with the detached focus he had learned during intelligence briefings in the military. She looked terrified but determined, clutching her pendant while trying to shield a younger colleague behind her. The recording showed Krextal's unit systematically hunting down and executing each member of the research team. "Turn it off," Jake said quietly. Krextal looked surprised by the request. "Not enjoying the show? I thought humans would appreciate seeing how their species handles extreme stress." I said turn it off. Jake's voice carried a new quality that made several patrons look up from their drinks with sudden attention. The Vorthak mercenary seemed to notice the change in atmosphere and deactivated the holographic display. "No appreciation for professional work," he muttered, tucking the device away. "Humans are too emotional about violence." Jake reached under the bar and withdrew a small metal pin, setting it carefully on the scarred wooden surface. It was a simple design, a skull wearing a military beret with crossed lightning bolts behind it. The few spacers who recognized military insignia immediately began moving toward the exits. 72nd Human Shock Infantry, Jake said conversationally. "Maybe you've heard of us." The change in Krextal's expression was immediate and dramatic. The alcohol haze cleared from his yellow eyes as survival instincts overrode intoxication. Every mercenary in the galaxy knew about the 72nd, the human unit that had held impossible positions and completed missions that defied tactical logic. "You're lying," Krextal said, but his hand was already moving toward the weapon at his side. "Senior Sergeant Jake Murphy," he continued in the same conversational tone, Medical discharge after taking shrapnel at the Battle of Kepler Station. Lisa Hayes was my sister. The cantina fell completely silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. The remaining patrons had either fled or pressed themselves against the walls, recognizing the signs of impending violence between apex predators. Krextall drew his plasma pistol with the speed of a trained killer, but his hands were shaking from a combination of alcohol and fear. "Stay back, human. I'm armed and I know how to use this." Jake stepped out from behind the bar, moving with the fluid grace of someone trained for zero-gravity combat in confined spaces. So am I. What happened next would become legend throughout the frontier sectors, passed along in whispered conversations in cantinas and trading posts across the galaxy. Security footage somehow found its way onto data networks despite Nexus Station's discretion policies, showing a human bartender disarming a fully equipped Vorthak mercenary, using nothing but his bare hands and 3 years of suppressed rage. But more importantly, it showed what came after. Instead of killing Krextall outright, Jake did something that sent chills through every mercenary and pirate who watched the recording. He activated his personal communicator and placed a call that would haunt criminal organizations across the galaxy. "Command, this is Senior Sergeant Murphy, 72nd Shock Infantry. I know I'm on medical leave, but I've located the mercenary unit responsible for the Rocky Mountain Massacre, requesting immediate backup for prisoner transfer and full investigation of contracting parties." The recording ended with Krextall begging for mercy while Jake calmly detailed the evidence he had gathered and the confession he had recorded. Within hours, human special forces units were tracking down the remaining members of the mercenary team, following financial trails that led to corrupt officials and criminal organizations across multiple star systems. Jake returned to bartending the next day, serving drinks with the same quiet efficiency as before. But now the cantina operated under different rules, with different clientele who spoke in respectful whispers and never mentioned Earth, unless they had something genuinely complimentary to say. And late at night, when the station grew quiet and the last customers had stumbled back to their ships, Jake would take out his sister's pendant and identification badge, updating her on the day's events and promising that her big brother was still watching over her, still making sure that justice found its way to those who thought they could harm his family with impunity. The word Galaxy had learned an important lesson about humans and their inconvenient tendency to remember everything and forgive nothing when it came to protecting their own.